manipulation, betrayal, murders. Today, we unveil the stories of the most notorious women in the Bible, the crimes they committed and the history behind them. In third place, as the most wicked woman in the Bible, we have Herodias. Before diving into her actions, it's crucial to understand what happened with John the Baptist. John the Baptist, a bold and charismatic prophet, began preaching in the regions around the Jordan River. He denounced sin, called people to repentance, and quickly garnered a large following due to his powerful message and his devoted, ascetic lifestyle in the desert. Tensions rose when John publicly criticized the marriage of Herod Antipas to Herodias. Herod Antipas, ruler of Galilee and Perea, had divorced his lawful wife to marry Herodias, who had recently divorced Philip, Herod's own brother. This marriage was not only morally controversial, but also a clear violation of Jewish law. John the Baptist fearlessly condemned the union, denouncing its spiritual consequences and warning of its corruption. His words did not go unnoticed. Herodias, deeply offended and threatened by John's message, sought revenge. Though Herod Antipas initially admired and respected John as a prophet, political and social pressures, along with Herodias' growing influence, led to John's imprisonment. While confined, John became a symbol of resistance, standing firm in his convictions. But imprisonment wasn't enough for Herodias. She wanted him dead. The climax of Herodias' story unfolds during an extravagant banquet hosted by Herod. Herodias strategically instructs her daughter, often identified as Salome, to perform a seductive dance for Herod and his guests. Herod, enchanted, promises to grant her anything she desires. Salome, guided by her mother, makes a chilling request: the head of John the Baptist on a platter. Herod, bound by his oath and wary of breaking his word in front of his guests, reluctantly agrees. And so, John the Baptist, the fearless voice who dared to denounce the marriage of Herod and Herodias, was executed. In second place among the Bible's most infamous women, we find Athaliah. Athaliah's story unfolds in the turbulent corridors of power in Judah. She was the daughter of Ahab and Jezebel, inheriting a legacy of political ambition and spiritual chaos. Her son, Ahaziah, briefly ruled the southern kingdom of Judah, but about a year into his reign, both he and Jehoram were killed by Jehu in a violent political upheaval. With her son dead and no heir old enough to take the throne, Athaliah seized the opportunity. In a bold and ruthless move, she took control of the throne, defying tradition and established royal succession. But her ambition didn't stop there. Athaliah saw the Davidic royal line, the descendants of King David, as a threat to her power. In Jewish tradition, the house of David carried divine significance, symbolizing God's promise of a future Messiah from David's lineage. To secure her grip on the throne, Athaliah ordered the mass execution of all royal descendants of David, eliminating anyone who could pose a future threat. This brutal purge was meant to wipe out the Davidic line entirely, but her plan would ultimately fail. One child survived, Joash, the last heir of David. He was secretly rescued and hidden in the temple by Jehoiada, the high priest. While Athaliah ruled, unaware, the boy grew in safety under divine protection. This bold action, hiding Joash, ensured the survival of the Davidic lineage, despite Athaliah's desperate efforts. Later, when Joash reached the appropriate age, the high priest Jehoiada orchestrated a daring plan to restore the rightful king to the throne. He organized a public coronation ceremony, presenting Joash as a true heir of David. The people erupted in support. Realizing their revolt was imminent, Athaliah tore her clothes and cried out, "Treason! Treason!" But the people were no longer deceived. They stood behind Jehoiada and the legitimate restoration of the Davidic line. Joash's rise to the throne marked a turning point in Judah's history. Athaliah was captured outside the temple, taken to the royal palace, and executed. At number 1, we find the most infamous and ruthless woman in the Bible, Jezebel. A Phoenician princess, Jezebel married King Ahab of Israel, forming a political alliance, but her influence extended far beyond diplomacy. With her came the worship of Baal, a pagan god. She actively promoted idolatry, building temples and altars throughout Israel, and led the nation into spiritual decline. Jezebel personified corruption and manipulation. She not only introduced foreign worship, but also persecuted and executed the prophets of Jehovah. Her hatred for those who opposed her beliefs was especially directed at the prophet Elijah, whose life was constantly under threat. She even used royal power and state funds to support hundreds of false prophets, promoting Baal worship across the land. One of the Bible's most striking stories of Jezebel's wickedness is the case of Naboth, a righteous man who owned a vineyard next to the royal palace. When King Ahab offered to buy the land, Naboth refused out of respect for the inheritance laws of his people. Ahab became distressed and obsessed, but he respected Naboth's answer. Jezebel, however, saw no obstacle she couldn't remove. She devised a malevolent scheme. She falsely accused Naboth of blasphemy by organizing 2 false witnesses. The righteous man was condemned and stoned to death based entirely on lies, all so that Ahab could take possession of his vineyard. This act of injustice and cruelty revealed not only Jezebel's evil, but the moral decay that defined her reign. But divine justice was not far behind. The prophet Elijah confronted Ahab and Jezebel, declaring God's judgment for Naboth's death. He prophesied that dogs would lick Jezebel's blood in the city of Jezreel. Years later, after Ahab's death, Jehu rose to power, driven by a divine mission to cleanse Israel. When Jehu arrived to confront Jezebel, she attempted to use her old tactics, painting her face and trying to seduce him with her charm. But Jehu was unmoved. He ordered her to be thrown from a window. Her body struck the ground, and the prophecy was fulfilled. Dogs devoured her flesh, just as Elijah had foretold. Throughout history, the stories of Herodias, Athaliah, and Jezebel have echoed as warnings, not just about the dangers of power and ambition, but about the corruption that comes when hearts are hardened against truth. These women were not simply villains in ancient texts. They were individuals who made choices that impacted nations, shaped legacies, and stood in direct opposition to God's will. And yet, their presence in the biblical narrative serves a greater purpose: to remind us of the constant struggle between good and evil, justice and injustice, faithfulness and rebellion. Their actions left scars on people, on kingdoms, and on spiritual history. But from their darkness, light still emerged. John the Baptist's message lives on. The Davidic lineage was preserved through divine intervention. And Jezebel's fall, as brutal as it was, fulfilled a prophecy that proved no evil goes unnoticed. In the end, the Bible doesn't just record history. It reveals the character of humanity, its flaws, its temptations, its potential for redemption, and through it all, the unwavering justice and mercy of God. So as we reflect on these infamous figures, let us not only remember their deeds, but also consider what we can learn about integrity, humility, and the consequences of turning away from the truth. We hope you enjoyed today's story. Which of these women shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments, and tell us which city you're watching from. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel to help spread our work to more people. Stay with God.